A rapidly rising Palestinian death toll, the difficulty of freeing hostages held by Hamas, and an increasingly vocal outcry of the Arab world. European allies and some Americans at home have pushed Biden's team to support a humanitarian pause to Israel's attacks and focus on getting aid to the Palestinians. For more on this, we are being joined by Peter Kuznich, professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Peter, welcome back to WION, and thank you so much for joining us. So it seems that the United States is warming up to a notion of a quote unquote humanitarian pause. They say this is different from a ceasefire. What are your thoughts?
I think the world is demanding, the world is demanding a ceasefire. The most that the United States is willing to concede right now would be a humanitarian pause, but even that would be a step in the right direction. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is just out of control right now. People are suffering greatly. As Biden and Blinken acknowledge, most of those who are suffering now were not Hamas supporters and are not responsible for the horrors, the outrages that Hamas committed. So the world is looking at these images, and it's very difficult to see these images of the devastation and death and injuries of the Gazan population and turn away and not see that something has got to be done besides just more bombing, more invasions, more military incursions. So, yes, I think the pressure is enormous internationally for a ceasefire. Netanyahu has ruled that out categorically, but Israel is increasingly isolated in that regard. And the question, the real supporter of Israel is the United States and the Biden administration. And so the question is, what will the United States do? What is going on behind the scenes? What kind of discussions are we having? And what kind of pressure is Biden willing to put? So far, it doesn't look like it's very much.
Peter, behind closed doors, you talked about what's happening behind the scenes. Well, in front of the cameras and in public, we see America's full-fledged support for Israel, and it really hasn't stopped Israel from going into Gaza. The Israelis know that this is the way to terminate Hamas, at least they believe so. But reports say that the United States is also worried about what comes next. For example, when Israel goes into Gaza, and let's say its incursion is finished and done with, then what is the long-term plan? And this is something the Biden administration has been facing criticism for as well when it comes to, for example, Ukraine. And it seems like we're just seeing that once again with the war in the Middle East. There doesn't seem to be an end goal, at least not for the United States.
There is no easy solution to this kind of situation except to have a more permanent arrangement, some kind of two-state solution that the world has been demanding, and that certainly many Americans have been supporting as well. If Israel can go in there, Israel can destroy Gaza, Israel can kill a lot of Hamas soldiers, Israel can kill some Hamas commanders and take out the infrastructure, and then we could be back in the same place in a few years. This kind of assault, kind of blind assault, creates more terrorists than it can eliminate. And people in Gaza, have been suffering. Even before the war started, 80% of the Gazans were living in poverty. 46% were unemployed. They were living in what's been described correctly as an open-air prison. And Israel has been willing to tolerate that because they figured that they could put up with whatever occasional attacks Hamas might make or Hezbollah might make, or it might occur on the West Bank without having to seriously consider a long-term peaceful solution. So Netanyahu especially has been guilty in that regard and thought that they could live with this. And then they were hit. And it was a colossal failure, but mostly a failure of political leadership on Netanyahu's part. With the more that's coming out, the more we know that intelligence and military officials were warning about what was going on. But what is Netanyahu concerned with was the judicial reform. doing away with with Israeli democracy was his goal, and not defending the Israeli people. So they could find a solution, but now with Israel going in there, and if Israel does succeed in eliminating the Hamas leadership, the consequence, the death surrounding that will be enormous. But Israel militarily can largely wipe out much of the Hamas infrastructure. And what happens then? Does Israel really want to go back there and occupy and control Hamas like it did up to 2005? I don't think so. Who else would want to step in? The Palestinian Authority is very weak, corrupt, and has little support. And who else is there in Gaza to take that on? Again, we don't think through the long-term planning. We didn't do that in Iraq when the U.S. invaded, and we saw what a catastrophe that was. We didn't really do that in Afghanistan, and now the Taliban are back in control. We haven't done that in Ukraine, and we're not doing that in Gaza either. The other danger that you've alluded to is that this is just the beginning. This could spread into a much bigger regional war that would even be more devastating and terrible for the Israelis. Hezbollah is weighing, its options right now. Hezbollah is a much more potent military force than Hamas is. They estimate Hezbollah's got 150,000 missiles and rockets, many of which are
Yeah.
precision guided, that could wreak terrible damage on Israel's cities and population. And then there are other
And backed by Iran as well. I'm sorry to cut you short, Peter. Uh, I have to wrap this up. I know Hezbollah is very powerful right now, and there are concerns about another front opening. But again, one has to wonder, is negotiations and a ceasefire with Hamas ultimately the viable option? As you mentioned, there is no easy answer to this question. Please come back. I'd love to get your thoughts as we move forward and hopefully speak during better times. Thank you for your company.
Thank you.